yeah, he really was innocent. You know, too late. It's irreversible.
Went through the evidence and the law and felt that they had plenty of information to make that decision.
I've been on the roll a little over 5 years.
A little over 5 years here.
Right, but I've been in prison.
I don't think so, and hopefully that will change.
Should there be?
There should be.
Number 15, Philip Ray Workman. In 1981, at 28 years old, Philip Ray Workman was living with his wife and 8-year-old daughter in Columbus, Georgia, and was heavily addicted to cocaine. That summer, he hitchhiked to Memphis, where on August 5, 1981, he robbed a Wendy's restaurant with a .45 caliber semi-auto pistol. During the robbery, an employee of the restaurant triggered a silent alarm after Workman granted her request to stand up to relieve a cramp in her leg.
His family, Mrs. Oliver. To this day, I still remember her just because of what I created. But I must say, for just looking at this evidence, not just the ballistics, but I just like to thank her for being courageous and explain how a person could grow up such as her and feel the way here. And to the state of Tennessee, I'm sorry. There wasn't just a shootout. I did try to surrender. I was struck in the head upon arrest that I had blood on my face from a previous encounter with somebody. That it wasn't just my word and just me making this up. And he testified about the corner of that building. Said I shot at him, said I turned, and the evidence bears it out. On the crime scene diagram, there are no shell casings and automatic shots. Where are the shell casings? They're not there because it didn't happen. So of course I downplayed it. But when I was struck, I know that first shot, O.C. Smith, Mr. Smith, that was found over there by the curb, that bullet had no signs of blood on it, no signs of tissue on its side. Therefore, the little dent. But is perjured testimony allowed in this country for any sentence, let alone a sentence of death? Why did he get the information to collaborate almost 100 in the pictures? The man wasn't there. And I know everybody's got to know this. For any type of sentence under such a thing, let alone to their death, saying that he was looking forward to this the last time because we felt we had to withdraw it. They then blocked us so diligently at every turn.
3 Memphis police officers, Ronald Oliver, Aubrey Stoddard, and Stephen Parker, responded to the alarm. Upon their arrival, Workman attempted to flee across a nearby parking lot, then fatally shot Lieutenant Ronald Oliver. Workman was charged with the slaying of Lieutenant Oliver. At the 1982 trial, Officers Stoddard and Parker testified that they had not fired their weapons, but that they had not seen Workman shoot Lieutenant Oliver. The prosecution presented testimony from an alleged eyewitness, Harold Davis, who stated that he had parked his car in the restaurant parking lot and was 10 feet away when he saw Workman shoot Oliver. The defense lawyers accepted the police version, conducted no forensic or ballistics analysis, and did not investigate Davis. At the sentencing phase of the trial, they presented no mitigating evidence, for example, of the physical harm Workman had suffered as a child and his drug addiction as an adult. Workman was found guilty of slaying during the commission of a felony by the jury. The jury recommended a fatal sentence. Many people have argued that he was innocent. At the 1982 trial, the case of the prosecution rested heavily on the testimony of Harold Davis, who claimed that he had just been 10 feet away from the crime scene and saw Philip Workman shoot Lieutenant Oliver. In November 1999, Harold Davis retracted his testimony, claiming that he called in the false lead to collect money to support his drug habit. Several other eyewitnesses have testified that they did not see Davis at the scene, and the police report on the crime scene never noted Davis's presence. At 10 p.m. Central Time, the Supreme Court refused to hear any appeals. At 12:15 a.m. on May 9, 2007, the Tennessee State Supreme Court refused to hear his final appeal, and Workman was fatally punished.
According to Officer Stoddard, Philip Workman was able to drag and into the Holiday Auto Parts lot, which is a distance of at least 60 feet based upon the crime scene exhibit. We noted earlier that, Don, could you get the crime scene where the money bag was and the jacket? Right next to the shell casings. And the other evidence, the incident that occurred at the hamburger shop in that parking lot. Now, if Officer Stoddard's correct about that, I just have to question how Philip Workman could possibly be able to drag two full-grown veteran police, Mr. Workman, on the head, although other dispassionate citizen witnesses supposed to be turning and firing at Officer Parker and Officer Stoddard, who both claimed that there were at least 5 shots. Well, it doesn't work.
Number 14, Joseph Mitchell Parsons. Joseph Parsons, 35, was sentenced to his demise for the fatal knifing 12 years ago, August 31, 1987, of Richard Ernst, a 30-year-old California man who was traveling through Utah on his way to Colorado. Ernst from Loma Linda offered a hitchhiking Parsons a ride near Barstow, California, unaware the man had walked away from a halfway house in Nevada where he had been paroled for armed robbery. At a rest stop near Powder One in Iron County, Parsons knifed Ernest at least 18 times and took off with his car and credit cards. Police caught up with him after he used a credit card to charge merchandise at a discount store. Parsons argued that he stabbed Ernest in self-defense after Ernest made an advance towards him. Refuting that claim, prosecutors said the medical examiner reported that the wounds appeared to have been inflicted while Ernest was sleeping. Later, a judge granted Parsons' motion to fire his attorneys, drop his appeals, and expedite his punishment. In the end, Parsons told the judge, quote, "I've been under a fatal sentence for 11 years, and I honestly don't see anything good coming out of it. I've made peace with myself and my family, and it's time to move on," unquote. Parsons submitted a last request to walk under the stars, play basketball, and watch science fiction films to prison warden Hank Galecta. Parsons also asked for his remains to be cremated and turned over to his family. On the evening before his punishment, Parsons watched The Mummy and was visited in his watch cell by his brother and his cousin. They shared his last meal of Burger King hamburgers, French fries, milkshakes, root beer, and chocolate chip ice cream. Parsons would become the first inmate to be punished in a new chamber that was built in 1998 at Utah State Prison for use in either firing squads or lethal injections. A mild sedative was delivered intravenously to calm Parsons before the deadly drugs were administered. At 12:10 a.m. on October 15, 1999, Parsons was punished by lethal injection. Number 13. Raheem Taylor. Raheem Taylor, convicted of slaying his living girlfriend and her 3 young children, was punished on February 7, 2023, despite his claims that he was in another state when the slayings occurred. Taylor and Angela Rowe live with the children at a home in the St. Louis suburb of Jennings. Taylor boarded a flight to California on 26 November 2004.
And I know it's a possibility, I know that I can, well, yeah, he really was innocent, Too late, it's irreversible. I don't, I focus on tomorrow or the next day or this or that. That's not what, I can't. Really about how has it affected me being on death row, an innocent man, and still hurts me. I couldn't mourn for them. I didn't get that right to mourn for them.
On 3 December 2004, police were sent to the home in Jennings after worried relatives said they hadn't heard from Rowe. Officers found the bodies of Rowe and her children. All 4 had been shot. The initial finding by a medical examiner was that the slayings likely happened within a few days of the discovery of the bodies, when Taylor was in California. But at Taylor's trial, medical examiner Philip Burt said the slayings could have happened 2 or 3 weeks before the discovery of the bodies. Bob McCulloch, who was St. Louis County's elected prosecutor at the time of the incident, said Taylor's claim of innocence was nonsense and the alibis provided by his daughter and her relatives were completely made up. DNA from Rowe's blood was found on Taylor's glasses when he was arrested. A relative taking him to the airport saw Taylor toss a gun into the sewer, and Taylor's brother told police that Taylor admitted to the crime, McCulloch said. Authorities believe Taylor shot Rowe during a violent argument, then slayed the children because they were witnesses. Taylor, 58 at the time, was the third Missouri inmate put down since November 2022 at the state prison in Bonne Terre. It was the United States' fifth fatal punishment in 2023, following a previous punishment in Missouri, 2 in Texas, and 1 in Oklahoma. All were by lethal injection. Taylor kicked his feet as the 5 grams of pentobarbital were administered, then took 5 or 6 deep breaths before all movement stopped. In a final statement, Taylor said Muslims don't perish but, quote, live eternally in the hearts of our family and friends, unquote. Number 12. Taylor Renee Parker. A woman was sentenced fatally for the hideous crime of slaying a pregnant mother and cutting out her baby to take as her own. Taylor Parker, 29, was convicted in 2022 of slaying Reagan Simmons Hancock, and a jury in Texas gave her the capital punishment. She slayed the 21-year-old in October of 2020, beating her in the head and slashing her before, quote, cutting her abdomen hip to hip, unquote, to remove the baby. Prosecutors said Ms. Simmons Hancock was still alive after the attack, which took place at her home while her 3-year-old daughter was there. The unborn child did not survive. In a statement in court, Ms. Simmons Hancock's mother, Jessica Brooks, called Parker an evil piece of flesh demon. She told her, quote, my baby was still alive, still fighting for her babies when you tore her open and ripped her baby from her stomach, unquote. The slaying took place in New Boston, 160 miles northeast of Dallas. Parker was pulled over the same morning for speeding and driving erratically. The baby was found in her lap with its umbilical cord appearing to come from her pants in an attempt to make it seem like she'd just given birth. It was only when they were both taken to the hospital that the horrific reality started to emerge. Prosecutors said in the run-up to the slaying, Parker had made herself look pregnant, faked ultrasounds, and had a gender reveal party. The victim's husband, Homer Hancock, said his wife was somewhat friends with her slayer and that Parker had taken their wedding and engagement photos. Apparently, Parker didn't want her own baby, but she was desperate to keep her boyfriend, so desperate, the woman was willing to fake an entire pregnancy to ensure he stayed with her. Parker disguised herself to look pregnant for 10 months, faked ultrasounds, threw a gender reveal party, and posted about it all over social media as she hunted for a victim from whom to steal a baby. Parker did extensive research online how to carry out her elaborate plan. She allegedly watched numerous YouTube videos on how to deliver and care for an infant, and on the day of the slaying, she watched a video about a physical exam for infants delivered preterm at 35 weeks. Simmons Hancock was exactly 35 weeks pregnant when she was slain. What else could prove that this was premeditated? The jury in Bowie County was shown a crime scene photo of Miss Simmons Hancock's blood-soaked body as prosecutors made closing statements. They could have sentenced Parker to life without possibility of parole, but she now joins the row.
A heavy burden feels lifted. I feel like now we can start trying to heal. I wanted to speak for our family and, let her know what we all felt. It's just how
Went through the evidence and the law and felt that they had plenty of information to make that decision.
Lengthy case, factually and emotionally, for everybody involved. So obviously we're disappointed with the outcome and see where it goes from there.
Number 11. Gerald Lee Mitchell. Gerald Mitchell, 33, was put down by lethal injection on 22 October 2001 in Huntsville, Texas, for the robbery and slaying of a man who tried to buy marijuana from him. In June 1985, Charles Marino, 20, and his brother-in-law Kenneth Fleming went to a Houston park to buy marijuana. They met Mitchell, then 17, who offered to sell to them. Mitchell and an unidentified accomplice got in Marino's car. Mitchell then pulled a sawed-off 12-gauge shotgun on the men and forced them to drive to a vacant house. After Mitchell took $25 and Marino's car keys, the accomplice told Mitchell to leave them there. When Mitchell asked the accomplice to get some rope, the accomplice left and didn't return. Mitchell then forced Marino and Fleming to sit on the floor. He shot Marino in the chest from a distance of 10 feet. Fleming rolled into a ball and then Mitchell shot him. Marino was slain, but Fleming survived. Donald Newsom was walking in the vicinity of the vacant house, heard shots, and saw Mitchell coming out of the back of the house with a shotgun over his shoulders. Mitchell told him he was just shooting some birds and drove off in Marino's 1980 Pontiac Trans Am. The same day he slayed Marino, Mitchell fatally shot another man, Hector Manguia, 18, when he refused to give Mitchell a necklace he demanded. Mitchell was arrested in Corpus Christi 7 days later, driving Marino's car. He gave police a written confession where he admitted shooting Marino and Fleming, but he claimed it was an accident. In April 1986, a jury convicted Mitchell of the capital slaying of Charles Marino and sentenced him fatally. All of his appeals in state and federal courts were denied. Mitchell was also convicted of attempted capital slaying and the Fleming shooting and given a 60-year sentence. He was also given a 60-year sentence for the slaying of Hector Manguia. As a juvenile, Mitchell had been arrested for robbery, burglary, and taking a pistol to school, and he had served time in a youth detention center. He also supposedly fathered 7 children with 6 women. Number 10. Robert Frada. A former suburban Houston police officer was fatally punished in January 2023 for hiring 2 people to slay his estranged wife nearly 30 years ago amid a contentious divorce and a custody battle. Robert Frada, 65, received a lethal injection at the state penitentiary in Huntsville for the November 1994 fatal shooting of his wife Farah. He was pronounced deceased at 7:49 p.m., 24 minutes after the lethal dose of the powerful sedative pentobarbital began flowing into his arms.
Justice has prevailed. Freedom has prevailed. The young girl, she still asks for her mother. Mommy, I love you, Mommy. I miss you. That's a lot of torture. That's a hell of a lot of torture.
I cannot wait for the day when I see him laying on that table, waiting to get the injection.
We'll have only 2 choices, either life in prison or death by injection.
For about 3 minutes before the punishment began, Frada's spiritual advisor, Barry Brown, prayed over Frada, who was strapped to the chamber gurney with intravenous needles in each arm. Brown, his prayer book on the pillow next to Frada's head and his right hand resting on Frada's right hand, asked God to be merciful to Bobby. Asked by the warden if he had a final statement, Frada replied, no. Brown resumed praying as the lethal drugs began, and Frada, his eyes closed, took a deep breath and then snored loudly 6 times. Then all movement stopped. Prosecutors say Frada organized the slaying for hire plot in which a middleman, Joseph Prystash, hired the shooter Howard Guidry. Farah Frada, 33, was shot twice in the head by Guidry in her home's garage in the Houston suburb of Atascocita. Robert Frada, who was a public safety officer for Missouri City, had long claimed he was innocent. Frada's lawyers argued unsuccessfully that prosecutors withheld evidence that a trial witness had been hypnotized by investigators, leading her to change her initial recollection that she saw 2 men at the scene as well as a getaway driver. Prosecutors said Frada had repeatedly expressed his desire to see his wife lifeless and asked several acquaintances if they knew anyone who would slay her, telling one friend he would do it himself and was willing to spend time in jail for it.
Can you describe your wife Farah in the best moments you had?
Very attracted to her physically, but she was just, she treated me wonderfully. And I felt that as she was coming over to my apartment and she'd want to cook for me, clean for me, do my clothes for me, I grew to love her and fall in love with her for the personality that she was. But she wasn't she was only like 5'4" and about 116 pounds when we met. Well, I always liked, so my children wouldn't grow up like me, being small and picked on. So no, she didn't meet the physical attributes of.
And you were very much into your, in your appearance. You wanted to look beautiful in life.
Oh, well, thanks. But I guess it was more insecurity. It was because I was always short and skinny. I got out of the bodybuilding competing very quickly because it was just, I got to the point where realizing working out aspect of things.
But you were always very well groomed.
Yeah, well, people
took care of yourself.
Yeah, I'm not one like spends $400 on haircuts. So, people would always look at me and think the place. Bodybuilding, I worked out.
Tanning studio.
Yeah, the tanning studio. I did to get it.
Number 9. Darlie Roudier. Darlie Roudier was a stay-at-home mother of 2 young boys, Devin and Damon, who lived in Rolette, Texas. On June 6, 1996, she called 911 to report that an intruder had broken into her home and knifed her and her 2 sons. Devin, who was 6 years old, survived the attack, but Damon, who was 2 years old, perished. Darlie was taken to the hospital with knife wounds to her throat and arm. She claimed that she had fought off the intruder, but the police found no evidence of a break-in. They also found no fingerprints or footprints from an intruder, and the only weapon found at the scene was a knife that belonged to Darlie. The police arrested Darlie on 2 counts of capital slaying. She was indicted by a grand jury on 2 counts of slaying, but the prosecution only moved forward on the charge pertaining to her youngest child, Damon. His young age at the time of the slaying made it possible for the prosecution to seek the capital penalty. Darley's trial began in 1997. The prosecution argued that Darley had slain her sons in a fit of rage after discovering that she was having an affair. They pointed to the fact that she had no defensive wounds and that she had washed her clothes and changed her story several times. The defense argued that Darley had been the victim of a home invasion and that she had fought off the intruder in self-defense. They also argued that the prosecution's case was circumstantial and that there was no physical evidence linking Darley to the slayings. The jury found Darley guilty of capital slaying and sentenced her fatally. She has been on the row ever since. The Darley-Routier case has been the subject of much controversy. Many people believe that she is innocent and that she was wrongly convicted. Others say that she is guilty and that she should be put down. Number 8. Carla Faye Tucker. Carla Faye Tucker, a name that reverberated throughout the United States during the 1990s. Born on November 18, 1959 in Houston, Texas, Tucker's life took a tumultuous turn on June 13, 1983. Tucker, along with her then-boyfriend Daniel Garrett, committed a brutal slaying that would shock the nation. They invaded the home of Jerry Lynn Dean and his companion Deborah Thornton, armed with a pickaxe and a hammer. The ferocious attack left both victims brutally battered, with Tucker striking the final blow that claimed Thornton's life. The savagery of the crime sent shockwaves through the community, leaving the public searching for answers and demanding justice. In 1984, Tucker and Garrett were arrested and charged with capital slaying. The subsequent trial garnered significant media attention due to Tucker's gender, the brutality of the crime, and her eventual religious conversion while in prison. The defense team, led by attorneys George Max Sechrist and Ron Mock, sought to humanize Tucker, portraying her as a victim of harm and drugs, hoping for mercy from the jury. As the trial unfolded, Tucker's life and troubled past were laid bare before the courtroom. The prosecution presented a compelling case, detailing the horrific details of the crime and emphasizing Tucker's active participation. Despite Tucker's claims of harm and coercion, the jury ultimately found her guilty of capital slaying, rejecting the defense's arguments. It was a decision that would shape the course of her life and become the focal point of intense national debate. During the penalty phase of the trial, Tucker's defense team passionately argued for leniency, highlighting her remorse, her transformation behind bars, and her newfound faith in Christianity. Despite widespread appeals for clemency, including pleas from prominent figures and religious leaders, Tucker's punishment date approached. On February 3, 1998, at the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas, Carla Faye Tucker was put down, becoming the first woman fatally punished in Texas since the Civil War.
I don't think so, and hopefully that will change.
Should there be?
There should be. Probably wishing there was a way I could give every...
Austin defense attorney, whose small office is just a few blocks from the state capitol.
I love you, Dana. Way, but I have to surrender that to the Lord.
Number 7. Sandra Lane. Sandra Lane, the 75-year-old Detroit area woman convicted of slaying in the fatal shooting of her teenage grandson, was sentenced to at least 22 years in prison in 2013, despite a plea from her lawyer that she might not survive a long stay. Lane got a minimum sentence of 20 years for second-degree slaying, along with a mandatory 2-year sentence for using a gun to slay 17-year-old Jonathan Hoffman. Hoffman was shot 6 times, including twice in the back, last spring in Oakland County's West Bloomfield Township. Lane said she shot him out of desperation during a physical altercation, but a jury rejected her claim of self-defense. Prosecutors said there were no signs of Lane being injured by Hoffman. A recording of a 911 call shows him being shot again while pleading for help, a critical piece of evidence that juries played over and over during deliberations. Hoffman was living with his grandmother during his last year of high school while his parents lived in Arizona, where a daughter was being treated for a brain tumor. He had a history of drug use and had tested positive for synthetic marijuana on the day of the shooting.
911, what's your emergency? What's the first shot? In what city? West Bloomfield. Okay, how did you get shot? My grandma shot me here. Okay, we're going to stay on the phone with me, okay, sir?
Lane claimed he feared flunking probation and demanded money and a car to leave the area. Prosecutors, however, said Hoffman was wearing just shorts and socks when he was slain, and he had made plans to see a friend that night, not flee. Lane's daughter, Jennifer Hoffman, told Judge Denise Langford Morris, "Do not show mercy. She showed no mercy when she planned, stalked, and slayed my son in his bedroom. Sandra Lane is pure evil and if given the opportunity would surely slay again." Lane, sobbing and wearing orange jail clothes with chains and handcuffs sagging on her slight frame, apologized to the court and the family. Lane sobbed deeply as she continued her rambling address to the judge. She repeatedly blamed the parents for not taking Jonathan back to Arizona and said her grandson's drug use made him unmanageable for an elderly woman. Number 6. Arthur Brown Jr. On June 20th, 1992, 4 people were shot and slain during a drug deal at a residence on Brownstone Lane in Houston, Texas. Marion Dudley, Arthur Brown Jr., and Tony Dunson had gone to the home of Jose and Rachel Tovar to buy 3 kilograms of cocaine when they decided to rob them of their drugs and money. 6 people were bound and shot by the trio inside the home. By the time police arrived, 3 victims were lifeless: Jose Tovar, Jessica Quinones, who was pregnant, and Frank Farias. Of the 3 survivors, one, Audrey Brown, later perished in a hospital, making the total number of slaying victims 4. The remaining 2 survivors identified Marion Dudley, Arthur Brown Jr., and Tony Dunson as their attackers. After the slaying, the perpetrators fled the area. When they found and learned that they were suspects in the slayings and wanted by the police, they fled town. The trio bought a Jeep Cherokee and convinced 2 women to drive them from Birmingham, Alabama to Louisville, Kentucky. Once there, they purchased plane tickets to Ohio under assumed names. They then left Columbus and headed north. Police found a sports vehicle they believed belonged to Dudley, but it offered them no new leads. The mothers of Dudley, Brown, and Dunson asked them to turn themselves in, but believed they were innocent. On October 23, 1992, Brown was captured by members of the Tuscaloosa County Metro Homicide Unit at an apartment in Northport, Alabama. Following their arrests, all 3 suspects were charged with capital slaying. Eventually, Brown Jr. was convicted of capital slaying. November 1993, he was sentenced fatally, and he was punished on March 9, 2023. In his final statement, he proclaimed his innocence and claimed the state was punishing an innocent man. Brown is buried at Captain Joe Byrd Cemetery. Number 5. Carrie Lynn Dalton. Carrie Lynn Dalton was accused of torturing and slaying Irene Louise May on June 26, 1988, at a mobile home park in Live Oak Springs, California, and was arrested on May 14, 1992. She and 3 others, Mark Lee Tompkins, Cheryl Ann Baker, and another man only known by the name George, were alleged to have used various weapons to commit a torture slaying: a cast iron frying pan, a knife, and a syringe filled with battery acid. She was convicted of first-degree slaying in May 1995 and was sentenced to her demise by lethal injection the same year. Since her sentencing, she has been incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California, awaiting her punishment and appealing her sentence. On May 16, 2019, the Supreme Court of California published their opinion on Dalton's automatic appeal. The justices found the charge of lying in wait and the charge of conspiracy were invalid. Therefore, they recommended that her sentence be 25 years to life. The California Supreme Court did not invalidate the third demise-qualified charge against Dalton. Therefore, she continues to be condemned.
I've been on the roll a little over 5 years.
A little over 5 years here.
Right, but I've been in prison. I'm pretty mad a lot of the time.
Pretty mad?
Sitting on death row for over 5 years, waiting, rotting. Because I admit that I'm a drug addict.
I would say you threw your own life away.
Right, which I did. I hold myself accountable, but I'm not guilty of this crime.
Means of regret.
Definitely.
Or remorse for all the things you did that all added up to whether it was that.
I'm not going to sit here and say I'm proud of the things I've done. I'm very ashamed. I've done a lot of rotten things. Angel, poor innocent, picked up out of society. My life took me here. And prison ain't cool. Way to the bottom to say, wait a minute, man, this ain't right.
Number 4. Coy Wayne Westbrook. Coy Wayne Westbrook was an American mass slayer convicted for the slaying of 5 people in Channelview, Texas on November 13, 1997. According to Westbrook, on November 12th, he went to visit his ex-wife Coons at her home in Channelview, Texas, in the greater Houston area. He was invited to a party at Coons' apartment along with other friends, Diana Ruth Money, and 3 other males. Westbrook had gone there with hopes of rebuilding the relationship with Coons, but went into a rage when the party's attendees began to mock him because Coons had cheated on him in the bedroom. At some point in the evening, Westbrook noticed that his ex-wife and 2 of the men had slipped away, and when he went into the bedroom, he found Coons having relations with both of the men. While they were mocking him, Cruz stole his keys and hid them in his pants, preventing him from leaving. He was able to get his keys back and he left. A very short time later, he returned in his truck and pulled out his hunting rifle and returned to the residence. After bringing the gun into the room, the attendees continued to torment him. Money threw a can of beer at Westbrook, which discharged the rifle, slaying her. After he fired at her, Cruz and Rogers ran toward him and he fired at them too. He then entered the room where Haslip and Coons were having relations and fatally shot them both. Westbrook's trial only went on for 11 days before a verdict was reached. At his trial, he admitted to slaying the victims, but he claimed that he did not intend to slay anyone, and said that he slayed the victims in a fit of rage. On August 13, 1998, Westbrook was sentenced to his demise by lethal injection. Despite his low IQ and the disputed testimony of Dr. George Dankowski, Westbrook was denied another trial in 2007. Westbrook was punished by lethal injection on March 9, 2016 and was pronounced deceased at 8:04 p.m. Number 3. Henry Watkins Skinner. Henry Watkins Skinner was an inmate in Texas. In 1995, he was convicted of bludgeoning his living girlfriend Twilla Busby and fatally knifing her 2 adult sons, Randy Busby and Elwin Kaler. The slayings occurred on December 31, 1993 at 804 East Campbell Avenue in Pampa, Texas. Skinner was convicted of the slayings on March 18, 1995 and sentenced to his demise. Skinner lived with the victims and admitted that he was in the home when the slayings took place, but claims he was in a comatose condition from a near-lethal dose of codeine and alcohol. After the slaying, Skinner claims he was roused off the couch by one of the mortally wounded victims, Elwin Scooter Kaler. Kaler died on the porch of a neighbor of Twilla Busby. Skinner was arrested several hours later, being found in the darkened front bedroom of Reed's home. When he was arrested, Skinner was wearing clothes bearing blood splatters that were DNA matched to 2 of the victims. He narrowly missed his sentence multiple times, once getting a stay of punishment just 20 minutes before he was scheduled to be put down. Skinner's last punishment date was scheduled on September 13, 2023, his 6th scheduled date overall. However, he naturally perished in February of that year. Number 2. Robert Solis. The horrible man who gunned down the Houston area's beloved first Sikh sheriff's deputy was sentenced to his demise. It took jurors less than an hour in 2022 to convict him of capital slaying. for the 2019 slaying of Sandeep Dhaliwal. Dhaliwal was Harris County's first observant Sikh sheriff's deputy. He gained national attention for helping change the department's policy to allow articles of faith, such as a turban, to be worn while on the force. In September 2019, Dhaliwal pulled over Solis, who was wanted for a parole violation during a traffic stop. As Dhaliwal was walking back to his patrol car, Solis shot the deputy in the back of his head. Jurors saw multiple angles of the shooting and heard from 65 prosecution witnesses who testified about a criminal history that goes way back more than 30 years. Solis fired his attorneys and represented himself in the trial. He did not present any witnesses. During his closing argument, his last chance to address jurors, Solis merely said, "The only thing I have to say is that it's your decision to make. My life is in your hands." And in the end, the jurors believe he should pay for his life for the crime. Number 1. Krista Gale Pike. Krista Pike, a name that sends chills down the spines of those familiar with her horrifying crime, became a notorious figure in the criminal justice system of the United States. Born on March 10, 1976, Pike's life took a sinister turn on January 12, 1995, when she and her accomplices committed a brutal act that shocked the nation. Pike's crime centered around the slaying of a fellow student named Colleen Slemmer at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Pike, along with her boyfriend Tadaril Shipp and a mutual friend Shadola Peterson, orchestrated a plan to lure Slemmer to an isolated area on campus. Once there, Pike, driven by jealousy and an alleged rivalry, subjected Slemmer to a horrifying ordeal that defied comprehension. The details of the crime were gruesome and savage. Pike and her accomplices brutally attacked Slemmer, repeatedly knifing and beating her. Pike, fueled by a twisted desire to assert dominance, even went so far as to carve her initial into Slemmer's body using a box cutter. The viciousness of the attack left Slemmer lifeless, with Pike and her cohorts callously leaving her body in a remote location. Following their arrest, Pike and her accomplices were charged with a litany of crimes, including first-degree slaying and conspiracy. The subsequent trial gripped the nation, with media outlets closely following the proceedings. Pike's defense team, led by attorney James W. Simmons, faced the daunting task of defending their client against overwhelming evidence and the public's perception of her as a remorseless slayer. During the trial, the prosecution presented a compelling case, meticulously outlining the gruesome details of the crime and highlighting Pike's apparent lack of remorse. The defense, however, sought to portray Pike as a vulnerable and troubled young woman who had been influenced by her upbringing and manipulative boyfriend. They argued that Pike's actions were a result of her psychological and emotional instability rather than premeditated malice. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury found Pike guilty on all counts. The trial then moved to the penalty phase, where the prosecution sought the harshest sentence possible, the capital punishment. Pike's defense team pleaded for mercy, emphasizing her young age and the potential for rehabilitation. However, the jury ultimately decided that Pike's actions were heinous enough to warrant the capital penalty, and in the end, that's the sentence she got. On August 27, 2020, Tennessee Attorney General Herbert Slattery's office requested the Tennessee Supreme Court to set a punishment date for Pike. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic in Tennessee and various other factors, Pike's attorneys were granted extensions by the court, allowing them more time to argue as to why Pike should not be punished fatally. The court is expected to decide on the matter as to whether Pike can be put down or if her sentence will be commuted. If Pike is put down, she would be the first woman to be fatally punished in Tennessee in roughly 200 years. And that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time at the next one.